So as I'm adjusting the colors and some of the reds, you can see I'm wiping my brush quite a bit. And so I go through a lot of paper towels. I think it's important to keep your paint clean. And the way you do that is just, continually wiping the brush. So you see, do a couple strokes and then wipe it and then make an adjustment. Okay, so one of the things that people have with, if they get muddy colors, part of it is on your mixing palette here. You can see I'm pulling out of that. I wouldn't be mixing in this area because, we've got some of that green in there. I want to have some clean color mixtures. So I move out of that pool. So part of it is your palette management. The other thing, in order to not have muddy colors, is if you keep overworking or working on a piece and you're like, oh, I think it's this color. Oh, I think it's that color. And you're kind of going back and forth between the cools, like the greens and the reds, you're going to start getting really muddy looking colors. And so what you need to do is clean your palette off if you're getting muddy colors. And then you stick with a color, and you have to remind yourself that it's all about getting the color temperature right, not necessarily a specific color. So sometimes we overwork a painting trying to get the exact color that we're seeing here, when it's more important just to get the correct value than anything else. That's right. So all the exercises that you've done in class, this really helps just the execution of something much more complex than a ball or a cube. The same principles apply here. I've said this is basically a complicated cube, and that's why we want to do the simple, paint the simple first. Really get a great understanding of it, so that when we look at something more complex like this, we still have the idea of the cube in mind.
So I see you're not really painting every single muscle or marble on that stake. You're really just getting the abstract shapes in the right place and really focusing on the value relationship, right?
That's right. Yeah. So want to go for these big shapes first before we go. I talked about shapes within shapes. We don't necessarily try and get all of those right at the beginning. It's too much of an overwhelming task. We want to just get those big planes, like this plane here. I did that plane there, this dark plane here. And then later on, I can go in and start adding, more of the nuances. So we start to the big, just like a wood sculpture, as a wood sculptor would do. Those big planes first, and then they work towards those smaller things. We're really trying to sculpt with paint, just like a woodworker would do, or a wood carver.
So I see just barely you introduce a little bit more bluish, purplish color into the red, but that tiny little...
This piece right here.
Piece right there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not exactly what you see on there. So what is your thought process when you decide to do that?
I'm pushing the idea. So here's the light, and this goes into shadow. So I'm going to cool it off a little bit. And I actually do see this area as cooler. There's some blue notes, but they're very slight. I'm just exaggerating them slightly so that I can convey that sense of light.
So later on, we're going to be talking about a lot of colors and temperature, and it's not necessarily like cold, blue.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cooler. Relative. It's relative. Yeah. So it's cooler, warmer. So this, like this red right here is a little bit cooler. And then there's some areas like right up in here that's more, like a warmer red. So that's why I have this range of reds is, it makes the painting more interesting, but it also, is what I'm observing here, that some areas are pinker than others. Part of it is the meat oxidizes as well. And so it turns to a duller, purpley sort of shade. And so I'm just, kind of observing those slight, temperature shifts. Again, it's not as important that you get maybe the exact color there, but you do want to get the relationship right, meaning how warm red is this to how cool red is this little piece right there. That sort of thing is what you're really after.
So would you say that value exercise, you have, say, 10 scale or even simplify it to 5 or 3 values, by working in different values and control the value usage, you are training yourself to see the relationship.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And that's what we want. We want to teach people the relationship between painting relationships is much more interesting than trying to precisely match things, because we want to be able to push and pull stuff in order to say something as artists. And we can't do that if we're so caught up in just perfectly matching everything that we see. We're not thinking about the broader aspect of art, which is to express yourself. The subject here is to some degree departure point, not the end all be all. Now, saying that, it is important to some degree as you're learning to copy things, to paint what you see, right? That's a good skill, but we don't necessarily need to do it to a fault. We need, because ultimately we're also wanting to express ourselves. And kind of enhancing nature. We want, we're not trying to paint, like a photograph. We're trying to do it as the human eye and emotion sees things. So there's this element of humanity into it, interpretation that goes into it. So of course, it's a balance between the two.
And it's why human paintings are always better than those AI paintings, right? They can execute exactly like
some precision, picture. Sure, yeah. Photo, but it just doesn't think, or it doesn't feel like a human does. And so, when you're seeing something lit up, and this is kind of an example of, it doesn't matter what you're lighting up. The light makes objects interesting, and makes them quite beautiful. So that's what, even a piece of meat like this normally wouldn't be considered necessarily, beautiful per se. But again, the light can make it more interesting, more beautiful.
When you talk about pushing and pulling, I remember Mike was saying, for example, the Impressionists, they key their painting value high to be really bright, but the relationship stays the same. That if they have correct relationship, you can key your paintings up or down, but still create a form.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think the relationship is a much freer way to paint than painting just, so a relationship meaning, okay, this is a dark shadow and this is in light. And so this needs to be lighter than that. That's a relationship. Now, how far you separate those values, right now as a kind of a study, I'm I'm being fairly accurate. But as an artist, you can also make a choice on how you want to emphasize certain things. I mean, you could take and paint this whole entire piece of meat at a much higher hierarchy value. You make this lighter and the whole thing lighter, but you still have to have, this darker than this area, that darker than that area, or that darker than that. You still have to have that. It's almost just like you would on your iPhone. If you want to make an image darker or lighter, you just dial up or dial down. All right, here. There's also some details, like if I painted every single little rib here, it would be also too busy. And so I'm not going to paint every little nuance that I see. I have to be selective because, again, the idea is that nature kind of offers you quite a bit, and actually always too much. It's like a buffet that has a huge buffet, and if you try and eat all of it, you're going to get really sick. And the same thing, your painting is just really not going to come together well if you try and paint everything in it.